The fearful encounter. Rakora, a member of the Silura species, trembled as her ship entered Earth's orbit. She had heard many things about humans, things that filled her with dread. Her people had warned her about the savage creatures that lived on this planet. They will devour you, they had said. They show no mercy. Every tale she'd heard painted humans as heartless predators, capable of wiping out entire species without a second thought. Her ship trembled as it passed through the thick atmosphere, and Rakora couldn't help but feel the weight of fear on her chest. This was the first time she was meeting humans, and her heart raced with uncertainty. What if the stories were true? What if she was walking straight into a trap? She could still hear her commander's voice in her mind. Do not trust them, Rakora. The humans may seem friendly at first, but they are dangerous. Those words echoed in her thoughts as she stared out of her ship's viewport, watching the planet's surface below. It was a place she had only seen in simulations, but now it was real. The lush green forests, the sprawling oceans, the bustling cities, it all looked so peaceful, so normal. How could a species that lived in such a world be as terrifying as her people claimed? Her hand shook as she set the ship's controls to land. She had to meet with the human delegation, and she had to do it alone. There was no turning back now. The ship's landing gear made a soft thud as it touched down on the planet's surface. Rakora took a deep breath and steeled herself. The doors of the ship opened with a soft hiss, revealing a group of humans standing outside, waiting for her. They wore uniforms, similar to the ones she had seen in human broadcasts, but there was something about them that didn't seem right. They looked calm, almost too calm, considering what she had heard about them. Welcome to Earth, Ambassador Rakora, one of the humans said. His voice was smooth, and he smiled at her, his teeth visible in a way that should have sent her running. But for some reason, she stayed rooted to the spot. Maybe they are hiding their true nature, she thought. Rakora didn't respond at first. She simply observed them, her eyes scanning every movement, every small detail. The humans didn't seem aggressive at all. Instead, they stood there with open faces and hands outstretched in greeting. They didn't seem to be armed, which made her feel even more uneasy. Was this just another trap? One of the humans, a woman with short, dark hair, stepped forward. We understand your people's fears, she said, her voice soft and sincere. But we are not what you have been led to believe. We want peace. She didn't seem to be lying. But how could that be? How could a species capable of such savagery ever truly seek peace? Rakora nodded, but inside, her mind was racing. Peace. How could that be? Every fiber of her being screamed that this was a trick. She had been taught to be cautious around humans, to never let her guard down. But these humans weren't acting the way she had imagined. There was no hostility, no aggression. They looked kind. A small group of humans began to walk towards her, their faces warm, inviting. They didn't seem concerned that she might be a threat. They weren't frightened of her at all. Perhaps I've misjudged them, Rakora thought. But then again, it could be part of their plan. She couldn't allow herself to forget their reputation. The woman with the short hair gestured for Rakora to follow her. Please, Ambassador, come with us. We've arranged a meeting so you can better understand our ways. The smile on her face remained, but Rakora noticed the faintest hint of weariness in her eyes, as though the woman had been through something difficult recently. Reluctantly, Rakora followed them, still cautious, still unsure. She wanted to believe the humans were as peaceful as they claimed, but she couldn't risk letting her guard down too soon. She had to observe, to learn their true nature. As they walked, Rakora noticed more humans, some sitting in parks, others moving through the city streets. There was no sign of violence, no screams, no chaos. It was as though everything she had heard about Earth was a lie. How could this be the same planet that had destroyed entire fleets of alien species? How could these peaceful, kind-looking creatures be capable of the destruction she had been warned about? Was it all a lie? The woman turned to Rakora. This way, she said, leading her into a large building. It was made of glass and metal, unlike anything Rakora had ever seen. Inside, humans worked at desks, their faces focused on their tasks. She couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as she walked through the sterile, bright halls. Everything about this place felt wrong. It was too calm, too perfect. "Are you ready to meet our leaders?" the woman asked, her tone still warm and inviting. Rakora hesitated. She still couldn't shake the fear that had taken root in her heart. She had expected brutality, fearsome warriors, maybe even destruction. But instead, all she saw were calm faces, peaceful gestures, and lives continuing on as if nothing were wrong. Was this a trick? As she entered the conference room, Rakora's eyes narrowed, her mind filled with confusion. The humans were so different from what she had been told, but could she truly trust them? Or was this the calm before the storm? As Rakora entered the grand conference room, she felt a chill run down her spine. The room was bright, with walls made of glass that offered a clear view of the city outside. Humans moved about, talking in low voices, their movements quick and purposeful. Rakora couldn't help but feel an unease growing inside her, despite the calm surroundings. Everything about this place screamed normalcy, the kind of normalcy she had never expected to find on Earth. She was led to a large table at the center of the room, where several humans were already seated. They greeted her with warm smiles, and the woman with short hair, who had introduced herself as Commander Helen, gestured for Rakora to sit. As she lowered herself into the seat, Rakora felt the tension in her muscles tighten. She had expected hostility, weapons at the ready, or at least a hint of distrust. Instead, there was nothing but calm. The humans seemed so ordinary. "So, Ambassador Rakora," a man with glasses said from the other side of the table, "we understand you've had some concerns about humanity." His tone was neutral, but his eyes searched hers with an intensity that unsettled her. "We're here to clear up any misunderstandings. Humanity wants peace, and we are prepared to help you understand who we truly are." Rakora swallowed hard, trying to steady her thoughts. She had prepared herself for this moment, for the discussions that would follow. Yet nothing she had been taught seemed to apply here. The humans' words felt genuine, but so had the ones she had heard in the stories. Was this some sort of game? Her hands tightened into fists under the table, though she made no attempt to hide it. Despite her confusion, she couldn't let her guard down completely. She had to remain cautious. The humans might be deceiving her, playing on her fears. Their peace, their kindness. It was all too good to be true. Commander Helen's voice broke through her thoughts. "We know your people have heard many things about us, Ambassador. We know you've been told we are savages, capable of unimaginable horrors. But I promise you, Rakora, that is not who we are." The others nodded in agreement. Rakora stared at them, the skepticism in her eyes unmistakable. Savages. Was it possible they had never fought like they were supposed to? Did they truly care about peace, or were they pretending for her benefit? "What do you want from us?" Rakora asked, her voice low and cautious. "Why have you sent for me? What do humans gain from helping us?" The room fell silent at her question. The air thickened, and for a moment, Rakora thought she had crossed a line. Had she asked too much? Was she about to hear something that would confirm her worst fears? Finally, the man with glasses spoke again. "We want to end the war," he said simply. "We want peace not just for our people, but for the galaxy. We are aware of the growing conflict, the tensions between the various factions, and we believe we can be a stabilizing force." Rakora felt her heart race. A stabilizing force. How could such peaceful, seemingly harmless creatures be so sure of their power? This didn't make sense. She had expected them to beg for survival, or at best, offer a temporary alliance. But this was something else entirely. "We're not here to conquer," the woman, Commander Helen, added, her voice soft but firm. "We're here to stop the bloodshed, to end the cycle of violence." Rakora's mind reeled. Peace was one thing, but something about their words didn't sit right with her. How could they expect to stop the conflict with mere words? She had seen the devastation brought on by the war firsthand. The galaxy was a shattered mess, and the idea that humanity could fix it with a smile and some promises seemed naive. Yet, despite the doubts swirling in her mind, Rakora couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Could it be true? Could humans really end this war without violence? She didn't want to believe it, but a part of her wanted to. "I'm not sure what you mean by stabilizing force," Rakora finally said, her voice edged with uncertainty. "You want to stop the war. But how? With what? Words alone cannot change the tide." The man with glasses leaned forward, his expression serious. "You're right. Words alone won't stop the war. But humanity doesn't rely on words alone. We rely on action, and we have the power to back it up." Rakora's eyes narrowed, suspicion creeping back into her mind. "Power?" she repeated. "What kind of power?" The silence in the room deepened, and for a brief moment, Rakora thought she saw a flicker of something in the human's eyes, a recognition of the danger they were about to reveal. But Commander Helen spoke first, her voice steady. "We have a fleet unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen." The words hit Rakora like a blast from an unseen weapon. She blinked, trying to process what they had just said. "A fleet?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man with glasses nodded. "Yes, a fleet of warriors unlike anything you've ever encountered. Deathworlders, humans who have lived through the worst, survived what no other species could. They are the ones who will ensure peace is possible." Rakora's heart skipped a beat. Deathworlders. The very word sent a wave of fear through her. Deathworlders were the stuff of nightmares, the most brutal of warriors, those who had survived the most unforgiving environments. Could it be true? Could these humans really command such warriors? And if they did, what would they want in return? Rakora's mind raced. The revelation of the humans' Deathworlder fleet had sent shockwaves through her. She had heard of such warriors, creatures of legend, feared by even the strongest factions of the galaxy. To hear that these humans, fragile and seemingly harmless, commanded such a force was incomprehensible. The meeting continued, but Rakora's focus wavered. She tried to listen to Commander Helen's explanation, but the words felt distant, muffled by the sound of her own thoughts. "What do you expect us to do with your fleet?" Rakora's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension that had thickened in the air. "What is it that you want from the galaxy?" Commander Helen met her gaze, unflinching. "We want peace, Ambassador, but we need you to trust us, to help us. The galaxy is at a tipping point, and the Deathworlders are the ones who will tip it in the right direction. But they need a catalyst." "A catalyst," Rakora repeated, her confusion evident. "What kind of catalyst?" "The war," the man with glasses answered. "We need the factions to see that we are serious, that we have the power to end it all in an instant if we must. But we also need them to see that we come in peace. We will not force anyone to submit, but we will ensure that those who wish to continue the violence will have nowhere to run." Rakora's mind raced. These humans, despite their calm words, seemed to hold a weapon of unimaginable power in their hands. And if the rumors were true, these Deathworlders would stop at nothing to end the conflict. Their very existence was proof of their unrelenting nature. "So, what do you want from me?" Rakora asked, her voice a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Why did you bring me here?" "We need you to help us convince the galaxy that we are not the monsters they believe us to be," Commander Helen said softly. "We need you to be our voice." Rakora looked at the humans in disbelief. "You want me to speak for you?" she asked, incredulous. "How can I convince the galaxy that you're not monsters when all I've ever known is the violence you are capable of?" The room grew quiet. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. For a moment, Rakora could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She had never imagined herself in this position, never dreamed that one day she would be asked to speak for humanity. "We know it's a lot to ask," the man with glasses said. "But the galaxy needs to see that humanity isn't just a threat. They need to understand that we have the power to change the course of history, but we can't do it alone." Rakora's mind swirled with uncertainty. On the one hand, everything about the humans' proposition felt wrong. They had something too powerful, something too dangerous. The Deathworlders were not a weapon of peace. They were a force of destruction, of annihilation. But on the other hand, something in Rakora couldn't shake the feeling that these humans were different. She glanced around the room, her gaze falling on the faces of the humans who had gathered here. They were not the savage creatures she had expected. They were not the warmongers she had been led to believe. They were something else, something she couldn't yet comprehend. "What if the factions don't listen?" Rakora asked quietly. "What if they don't believe you? Or worse, what if they fight back?" Commander Helen's eyes darkened, but her voice remained calm. "If they fight, we will end it. Quickly, without hesitation. The Deathworlders will bring the war to an end, whether the factions want it or not. But we hope it won't come to that." Rakora nodded slowly. The weight of the decision was heavy on her shoulders. She had always believed that the galaxy's future was a matter of survival, that it was a war of strength, of who could dominate and destroy. But the humans' words were challenging everything she had ever believed. "You've shown me your strength," Rakora said, her voice low. "Now show me your humanity." Commander Helen smiled, the first real smile Rakora had seen from her. It was a strange smile, one that conveyed more than just reassurance. It was a smile that held a promise, one that Rakora could not yet understand. "We will, Ambassador," Helen replied. "We will show you." The meeting ended shortly after, but Rakora's mind was far from settled. She walked out of the room with the humans, her thoughts clouded by doubt and curiosity. What had she just agreed to? And more importantly, what would humanity's Deathworlders do when the time came? As she stepped onto the transport shuttle, she felt a strange sense of foreboding. She was being pulled deeper into something powerful, something dangerous. She had to prepare herself for the challenges ahead. If she failed, the entire galaxy could pay the price. But if she succeeded, the war might finally end, and humanity's place in the galaxy would be forever changed. As Rakora sat alone in her quarters aboard the human vessel, her mind raced. Every moment since her arrival had been a whirlwind of information, a bombardment of facts and strategies that had shattered her understanding of the galaxy. The humans were not what she had expected, and neither were their Deathworlders. She had seen their warriors up close during her tour of the fleet. They were not like anything she had ever encountered before. Human, yes, but unlike any species she had ever known. Their strength was almost tangible, a raw power that seemed to emanate from them like a storm. They moved with purpose, with calm precision, their eyes always alert, scanning for threats. But it wasn't just their physicality that intrigued Rakora. It was their mentality. There was an unsettling coldness to them, an understanding that war was not an act of violence, but a methodical process, one that required no emotion, no hesitation. The Deathworlders were warriors by nature, but they were not driven by the same impulses that had caused other species to wage wars for dominance. They fought not because they were compelled, but because they could, because they knew how. As she sat in her room, Rakora's thoughts drifted back to the humans' plea for help. She had never considered them to be a credible force, but now, after seeing the Deathworlders firsthand, she couldn't deny the power they held. These humans were not just surviving the galaxy's chaos, they were shaping it, and they'd wanted her help in doing so. The door to her room slid open, pulling her from her thoughts. Standing there, silhouetted by the hallway lights, was Commander Helen. "Ambassador," Helen said, her voice calm but firm. "We need to talk." Rakora nodded, standing to greet her. She had 1,000 questions, but she had learned that the humans had a way of speaking without saying much. They were careful with their words, as if every sentence was carefully crafted to reveal only what they wanted the galaxy to know. "I'm listening," Rakora replied, motioning for Helen to sit. Without hesitation, Helen stepped into the room and sat across from her eyes dark with purpose. "We've made contact with several factions. The response has been less than favorable." Rakora frowned. She had expected this. The galaxy was full of prideful races who believed they had everything under control. They would never accept the idea of humans, of Deathworlders, coming in to set things right. "We knew it wouldn't be easy," Helen continued. "But we need their support, or this war will go on much longer than it has to. The problem is that the Galactic Council is split. Some factions want to negotiate, others want to fight." "And where do you stand?" Rakora asked, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "We're ready to do what's necessary," Helen said simply, her gaze unwavering. "The Deathworlders are not just soldiers. They're not just warriors. They are the last line of defense for a galaxy on the brink of total destruction." Rakora looked at her, feeling a sense of growing unease. "And what does that mean exactly? Are you threatening the galaxy?" "Not threatening," Helen replied, "just making it clear. The Deathworlders don't need to prove their strength. The galaxy already knows what they are capable of. But we need them to understand that we will stop at nothing to ensure peace. If the factions won't listen, we'll make them." The room fell silent as Rakora absorbed the weight of those words. She had thought she understood the humans, but now she was beginning to realize just how much more was at play. This was not a simple conflict of power. It was a war of ideologies. The Deathworlders were not only powerful warriors, they were the embodiment of humanity's resolve. They would not back down. They would not falter. "What happens if they don't listen?" Rakora asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We'd bring them to the table," Helen said, "one way or another. We've done everything we can to avoid escalation, but if the factions insist on fighting, we'll give them a lesson they'll never forget." Rakora's thoughts raced. Could this really be the answer? Could the Deathworlders truly bring peace to the galaxy, or would they be the ones to plunge it into further chaos? She had seen their strength, but she had yet to see their true nature. Were they monsters, or was there something deeper within them that could change the galaxy for the better? Before she could respond, the door slid open once more. This time, it was one of the Deathworlders himself who entered the room. His presence was overwhelming, his very aura radiating power. He was tall, his body covered in a sleek black combat suit, his face obscured by a helmet. His eyes, however, were visible, cold and calculating, but also something else, a hint of respect, a promise of something more. "You wanted to speak with me?" Rakora asked, though she wasn't sure what she was hoping to hear. The Deathworlder didn't speak at first. He merely stood there, his gaze fixed on Rakora, as if assessing her very soul. Then, at last, he spoke. "Peace is not a gift, Ambassador. It is something that must be earned. And sometimes, the galaxy needs a reminder of what happens when it forgets that." The words hung in the air like a threat, a promise, and a warning all rolled into one. Rakora could feel the tension tightening in her chest. There was no turning back now. The Deathworlders were not just humanity's warriors. They were the galaxy's last hope. And if she was going to be the voice for humanity, she had to understand one thing. When the Deathworlders moved, the galaxy moved with them. There was no going back from this. As the days passed, Rakora's thoughts were consumed with the looming decision. The fate of the galaxy was on the line, and the stakes had never been higher. She couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was at play, something that extended beyond the battlefield and into the very heart of the galaxy's future. The Deathworlders weren't just responding to a call for help. They were changing the very fabric of the war itself. The tension aboard the human fleet was palpable. Every day, she watched as the Deathworlders trained and prepared with military precision. But there was something else beneath the surface. They moved with a quiet purpose that was almost unsettling. These weren't just soldiers preparing for battle. They were preparing for something far more complex. Rakora had learned much during her time with the humans. The Deathworlders fought not only with physical power, but with a strategic brilliance that outmatched every other race in the galaxy. They understood the rules of warfare in a way that few could comprehend. It was not about brute strength. It was about manipulating every element of the fight, from the battlefield to the very morale of the enemy. The Deathworlders didn't just kill. They broke their enemies' wills before the first shot was even fired. One evening, as Rakora walked through the corridors of the flagship, she overheard a conversation between two of the human officers. They were discussing a new plan, one that was as bold as it was dangerous. "The Deathworlders are ready," one officer said, his voice low but confident. "We'll hit the enemy where it hurts the most, by using their own weaknesses against them. But they'll expect us to strike at their fleet." The second officer replied, "We need to think beyond that. We're not just going to attack," the first officer said. "We're going to make them think the entire galaxy has turned against them. We'll send a message that the galaxy isn't afraid of their power anymore." Rakora felt a chill run down her spine. The plan was brilliant, but it was also terrifying. It wasn't just about defeating the enemy. It was about shattering their very sense of security. And that was a power that only the Deathworlders could wield. It was a power that, once unleashed, could never be put back into its cage. As she walked deeper into the flagship, Rakora was greeted by the sight of the Deathworlder warriors in training. Their movements were fluid, like a predator stalking its prey. Every strike, every maneuver was calculated, precise, and terrifying. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. They moved as one, a single unit with one shared purpose: to win. But as Rakora watched them, something shifted. One of the warriors, a tall human with dark hair, turned and locked eyes with her. His gaze was intense, piercing, as if he could see straight through her. There was no malice in his eyes, only understanding. It was as though he knew what was coming and was silently preparing for it, just as she was. She couldn't help but feel a strange sense of admiration for him and his kind. The Deathworlders were not mere soldiers. They were a force of nature. And Rakora was beginning to understand that she was standing at the edge of something far greater than she had ever imagined. That night, Rakora couldn't sleep. Her mind kept racing, replaying the conversation she had overheard, the eyes of the Deathworlder, and the cold, calculated nature of the plan she had just learned. There was something unsettling about how the Deathworlders operated, something that went beyond mere tactics. They were not fighting for themselves, but for something larger, for the survival of the galaxy itself. The next day, the plan was set into motion. The Deathworlder fleet began to move, slipping through the galaxy's many sectors with a quiet efficiency that left no room for doubt. Their objective was clear: to infiltrate enemy territory, undermine their forces, and make the galaxy's factions understand that resistance would lead to their own annihilation. Rakora watched as the Deathworlders deployed in the dead of night, silently slipping past enemy defenses. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. The factions still thought they could win the war through conventional methods, through battles that followed predictable rules. But the Deathworlders didn't play by the same rules. They played by their own. As the battle began, Rakora felt the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders. She had made her choice. She had aligned herself with humanity and the Deathworlders. But as the first strikes landed, and the enemy's forces were shattered in ways that no one could have predicted, she realized the true cost of this alliance. This was no longer just about war. This was about reshaping the very foundation of the galaxy itself. The Deathworlders weren't just fighting for victory. They were fighting for something far greater. They were fighting to ensure that the galaxy would never forget the price of underestimating them. And as Rakora watched their silent, unstoppable march, she understood that the galaxy was about to change forever. As the Deathworlder fleet moved deeper into enemy territory, a sense of anticipation filled the air. Rakora stood on the bridge of the flagship, staring out at the stars, now filled with the ominous shadows of warships. The vastness of the galaxy stretched before her, a canvas upon which the Deathworlders were about to paint their mark. It wasn't just a battle anymore. It was the beginning of a new era. Reports flooded in from the field. The Deathworlders had struck with precision, targeting vital systems and key structures that were once thought impenetrable. With every strike, every calculated move, their enemies seemed to falter, their confidence beginning to crumble. The Galactic Council had never seen warfare like this before, and it terrified them. On the ground, the Deathworlder soldiers moved with ruthless efficiency, sweeping through enemy lines. Unlike the other races in the galaxy, they didn't fight for honor or glory. They fought for survival. And in their eyes, survival was everything. Each decision was made with cold, logical calculation, each battle carefully designed to break the enemy's spirit as much as it was to win. Rakora, still adjusting to the Deathworlders' way of war, was now starting to see the brilliance in their strategy. It wasn't about how many ships they had or how much firepower they could muster. It was about precision and timing. The Deathworlders had learned to read their enemies in ways that no other race could. They knew where their enemies were weakest, and they struck there with surgical precision. On the battlefield, the Deathworlders were relentless. There was no retreat, no hesitation. If one strategy failed, another was already in place. It was as though they had seen the future of every battle and knew exactly how to react. The Galactic Council, on the other hand, was caught off guard. They had relied on traditional tactics, expecting a brutal clash of fleets and armies. But what the Deathworlders had unleashed was something far more terrifying, a new kind of warfare, one that was designed to crush not just the enemy's forces, but their very will to fight. The Council's diplomats had tried to intervene, negotiating peace, but they couldn't understand the Deathworlders' resolve. They could offer no deals, no concessions, no way to escape the inevitable. The Deathworlders were not here to negotiate. They were here to win, and they had every intention of doing so. As the days wore on, the reports continued to come in. The enemy was collapsing in the face of the Deathworlders' relentless assault. Supply lines were cut, communications were severed, and key command centers were obliterated. The Galactic Council, once so powerful, was beginning to crumble under the pressure. On the bridge of the flagship, Rakora felt a shift in the atmosphere. The tension was no longer just the anxiety of war. It was something more profound. The galaxy was starting to realize what had been unleashed. The Deathworlders were not just another faction in the conflict. They were a force of nature. And as they swept through the galaxy, they left nothing but devastation in their wake. Despite the victories, Rakora couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had begun to settle deep within her. The Deathworlders' methods were effective, but they came with a cost. Each victory, no matter how significant, left her wondering if the galaxy would ever be the same again. Could they stop? Would they stop? Or was this the beginning of an unrelenting, all-consuming war that would change everything? As the Deathworlder fleet closed in on the heart of the enemy's capital, Rakora knew that they were nearing a crossroads. The Galactic Council was broken, its leadership in disarray. The remaining forces of the enemy were scattered and fragmented. Yet despite all of this, the Deathworlders pushed forward with no sign of slowing down. They had no interest in occupying planets or negotiating peace. They had one goal: to eliminate any and all threats to their survival. The plan had always been clear: to demonstrate that no one could threaten them and live to tell the tale. As the fleet advanced toward the enemy's core world, Rakora saw the realization in the eyes of those around her. There was no going back now. The Deathworlders had changed the rules of the game. They had shown the galaxy that they would not back down, and in doing so, they had left an indelible mark on the galaxy's history. As the first assault on the capital began, Rakora watched the Deathworlder ships descend like a storm on a peaceful landscape. It was the end of an era for the Galactic Council. The war, as the galaxy knew it, was over. The Deathworlders had won, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The battle was reaching its peak, the final clash of titans that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Rakora stood on the observation deck, staring at the chaos unfolding in space. The enemy's last line of defense was crumbling, their ships scattered like fragile toys in the path of a storm. But even in the face of such devastation, the Deathworlder fleet showed no signs of slowing down. They had a singular purpose: to wipe out the Galactic Council's influence once and for all. The alien forces, now broken and disorganized, tried to regroup in a desperate attempt to turn the tide. They launched their final counteroffensive, sending every remaining ship into a last-ditch attack. But it was no use. The Deathworlders had already proven that they could adapt faster, think smarter, and fight with a relentless ferocity that no one had anticipated. Rakora knew the end was near, but a part of her felt uneasy. She had seen the Deathworlders destroy countless fleets, obliterate defenses, and strike terror into the hearts of their enemies. But now, as she watched the devastation unfold before her, a realization began to take shape. The Deathworlders were not just fighting for victory. They were fighting for something deeper, something more primal. It was survival, yes, but also a message. A message that would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. The message was clear. Never again would anyone underestimate humanity. Never again would anyone think of them as just another race to be pushed aside. The Deathworlders were sending a signal to the galaxy. If you mess with us, we will show you the full force of our wrath. Rakora, standing amid the wreckage of what was once the Galactic Council's might, couldn't help but feel a strange mix of awe and fear. She had witnessed humanity's power, and it was like nothing she had ever seen before. They were a force of nature, an unstoppable tide that had come to claim what was rightfully theirs. No one could challenge them. Not now, not ever. As the last of the enemy ships exploded into fiery fragments, the Deathworlder fleet reigned victorious. The galaxy would never be the same. The Galactic Council, once the governing body of the known universe, had fallen. Its authority was shattered, its leaders either dead or fleeing. In their place, a new era was beginning, one where humanity's Deathworlders would no longer be ignored or feared. They were now the galaxy's dominant power, and everyone knew it. But even as Rakora looked on at the remains of the once mighty council, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Deathworlders had made their mark, but the galaxy was vast, and many more challenges lay ahead. There would be other races, other factions that would rise, thinking they could challenge humanity's dominance, and the Deathworlders would be ready. Rakora's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see the Deathworlder captain standing at the doorway, his face grim yet resolute. "It's over," he said. "The galaxy knows our name now. We have won, but the real test is what comes next." Rakora nodded slowly, her eyes still focused on the view outside. The Deathworlders had done the impossible. They had toppled the Galactic Council, destroyed its power, and emerged victorious. But as the final remnants of the enemy burned in the distance, she knew that this victory was only the beginning. The galaxy would never forget the day humanity showed its true power. The Deathworlders had come, and they had left a legacy that would never be erased. From this point on, no one would ever forget the cost of underestimating humanity.